and ISO 31000. My name is Holly and I'm part of the professional development team here at IIRSM. In this webinar, Mark Woods, Managing Director of Statius Management Services, will provide an introduction to risk management and ISO 31000, the international standard for managing risk, to help you understand the role risk management can play in supporting you and your organisation in navigating an ever-shifting business landscape. Before I hand over to Mark, there are just a few housekeeping type things I need to run through first. So to begin with, you'll be on mute for the duration of the webinar, but please do ask any questions that you have using the chat function on the right-hand side of the screen. Mark and I will then pick these questions up at the end of his presentation. Secondly, the webinar is being recorded and a copy will be available on IIRSM's YouTube channel post-event. We will also share this recording with Statius Management Services. Okay, that's enough from me. Over to you, Mark.
First things, good morning and thank you for joining us. A bit of a technical hitch. I can't now see the actual presentation.
Okay, can you see it now?
No, I've got access. Got it.
Got it? Thank you. Brilliant.
So, technology sent to thwart us, or at least me. Good morning, thank you for joining us. My name's Mark Woods, and as Holly said, I'm a director of a company called Statius. Today I'm in sunny Vines Cross in East Sussex. I hope the sun is shining where you are. I hope you'll enjoy the session, and I sincerely hope I can help you with the Risk Management Universe and ISO 31000. I also hope we can bring some clarity to your view of risk management, and with that in mind, we'll be taking a number of polls throughout the session. But before we start, a bit of housekeeping first. Don't worry about taking notes. As Holly has already said, the webinar will be made available to you. We're going to put it on a download page from our landing page, along with a load of other goodies, other resources and tools and techniques that we'll refer to along the way. And we'll be giving you the address of that at the end. Secondly, just to give you a flavour of the clients we've worked with and perhaps how you might fit into that, some of the big guys include people like Rio Tinto, an Anglo-American, and GEA, a massive international engineering company. Public sector bodies include Epping Forest and District Council, Guildford District Council, and many of the research centres operating around the country. But our sweet spot is probably ambitious £5 to £50 million privately owned companies, SMEs, and these range from two-person paper merchant to a £400 million construction group. So that's a bit about us. So before we proceed into the detail, I think there's a $64 million question to be asked. And that question is, why is this stuff important? Well, it's a bit of a cliche to say the only constant is change. Did you know the original recording of that saying was over 2,000 years ago? It was originally uttered by a pre-Socratic philosopher called Heraclitus. But let's put that into a bit of context. Now, I like a bit of music, and in my time, let's call it the last 30 years. That's probably a bit more than that, but the last 30 years, the format of choice has changed from LPs to CDs to MP3s. And that's without taking into account the shift from owning music to renting it. That's an awful lot of change in one sector in a relatively small space of time. So another question to ponder is, how many companies have successfully negotiated that change? So the objective of risk management is to properly and consciously think about changes like this in advance of, instead of simply reacting to them. Because I'm pretty sure you don't really want to be the HMV or the EMI of your sector. So that brings us to our first poll. Holly, if you could do the honours, please. So it's a multiple choice question. The first kind of answer is the whole company is involved in strategic and robust and embedded risk management processes, which are regularly updated so they inform day-to-day operations and vice versa. Senior managers are involved in regularly reviewing risk management, and risk management is a sporadic and uncoordinated activity undertaken by different managers in different departments on an ad hoc basis, and there's no real or coordinated understanding of risk management at all. if you'd tick the relevant box, and hopefully some results will appear.
Just give everyone a few minutes. Okay, and I'll end the voting now.
Ooh, so we've got, so everybody looks like they're doing something, or one, there is no really coordinated risk management at all. A lot of people, it's sporadic and uncoordinated. So we should, as part of the webinar, we should be able to give them some frameworks and some tools and tips to make it more coordinated. So yes, it looks like it's going to be helpful to a number of people. So thank you for that. If we could move on to the agenda.
Yeah.
So we want to talk about the aim of risk management. We want to talk about people, risks and progress generally. I then want to introduce you to something that we call a one-page window. And that's really not just for risk management systems, that's for any management systems. And that should reflect the way in which your work works, a phrase we'll use a lot. We'll then talk about the risk management universe and then into the detail of 31,000, and we'll focus on principles and processes. And then we'll come back to the why it's important questions following a next steps from Q&A. So the aim of risk management should be to help managers remove the downside bias of risk management programs and liberate the energy around a positive approach that enhances an organisation's ability to achieve its objectives. The point here is that regulatory compliance is often seen as the goal of risk management. Viewed in this light, regulatory compliance becomes a byproduct of good risk management. Let's think a little about risk itself and its impact on progress. The only way to learn and to develop is by taking a risk. And obviously, as a species, we've been taking risks since the dawn of time. Many of these risks were wrapped up in religion, myth, and legend. And the world we live in is unpredictable, strange, surprising, incomprehensible, and awesome. But we cannot understand everything all of the time. We need to take risks to progress. So just imagine what the world would have been like if Hannibal hadn't crossed the Alps on his elephants, if Columbus hadn't sailed into the unknown, if Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, hadn't said, yeah, I'm really happy to be strapped to a missile and shot into space, and if Kennedy hadn't laid down the gauntlet to get a man on the moon. As a species, we pretty much have to take risks to learn, improve, and progress, and take the world forward. As with every risk, there's usually a bigger fish, the opportunity of discovery, or indeed profit. We have an insatiable desire to confront risk and manage it proactively, and companies can't profit unless they're taking some kind of risk. But if a company can develop a proactive ethos to risk and opportunity management, that approach can be used by the organisation to drive performance. And in such environments, two things happen. The interconnectedness of departments and processes can become clearer, and compliance and governance become byproducts of the process. Without a proactive process-focused approach, risk management becomes a backroom function, more concerned with ticking boxes and compliance and being able to be seen to do the job rather than actually adding value. So let's explore this critical idea of interconnectedness a little, the core of which is about how you deliver value to customers and clients. We'd say that most organisations have got three key processes: get job, do job, bill job, which includes getting paid. It's always more complicated than this and might include a raft of other activities. You might have to undertake site visits to a customer before putting a quote together. liaison with suppliers and subcontractors prior to quoting and after. In many instances, it may be necessary to undertake detailed design and scoping activities at the inquiry stage, so before an order is placed, simply to be able to cost the customer's requirements properly. And the billing job may not occur at the end of the process. Upfront deposits may be required in order to secure commitment, which is then supplemented by stage payments thereafter. Obviously, these are only a very small sample of the activities that any organisations undertake. The key here is to get this get job, do job, bill job concept. It's a starting point for fleshing out the detail of the logic and sequence of your own processes. Your diagram should reflect as much as is possible the way in which your work works. We're now going to explore an example taken from a 60 staff, 8 million turnover engineering company, making sensors for building management systems. This is what we'd call a core activity map. As the name suggests, a map of the core activities showing how value is created and delivered to the customer. It starts with generating awareness on the far left, essentially the marketing, and ends with fulfilling and delivering orders on the right. Both in between these processes and supporting them are other processes. The core activity map is a model of your processes that should show how you think about how your work works, how you deliver value to your clients. However, this is only part of the story. In addition, we all have to undertake a raft of other things that the customer may not have the slightest interest in. And these also carry risks, so they also need to be accounted for. We do this by using the Plan, Do, Study, Act model, the PDSA model, which should be familiar to those that have experience of other standards. So let's have a look at how this core activity map fits into a core PDSA model, what we call the overall systems diagram, the diagram of the whole company and the associated management system. Down the left-hand side, you'll see the components of the PDSA model with the Do core activities in the large green block. When we add in the core activity map and the stock management processes previously shown, the diagram begins to take shape. Above these Do core processes, there are the planning and strategic activities, business planning, objective setting, roles and responsibilities, essentially all the strategic stuff which would take into account the external issues, the thing these standards call context. Incidentally, there are a number of recent blogs on our website referencing different tools, PESTLE, Porter, SWOT analysis, all with templates and downloads which address these context issues. Below the core activity map, there's another Do section. These are support activities. As the name suggests, the thing that you still have to do, but which are totally dedicated supporting the activities of getting the product or the service to the customer. These activities the customer neither sees nor cares about. You need trained and competent people to do the right job. Most of us need a building to work from, and that needs to be compliant with the law. You may need to manage stores or logistics, and you certainly need to ensure that the VAT man and the tax man are kept happy. But the customer gives not one jot about these activities, but they do carry risk. Below that are the study and act activities, which is where you detail things like monitoring, continual improvement, auditing and communications. So all the boxes on the diagram carry some degree of risk and opportunity. They can all be made faster, slicker and better. The key here is to use your terminology and your language and make the system look as much like your business, your organisation, so that it reflects the logic and flow of your business. It needs to reflect the way in which your work works. Clearly, this is just one example, and for those interested, we do have a booklet called Developing Management Systems that Increase Sales and Bolster Margins. In it, we work through a number of different examples of this approach. And should you want to, you can download this from the link at the end. The key point to notice is this approach is deliberately interconnected. It takes a cut through the traditional organisational chart as it's focused on delivering value to the client, not internal reporting structures. So let's take a second poll to see if anybody has a similar diagram for their staff, to see how these processes and procedures kind of fit together in this manner. If you would do the honours, please.
Yep, bear with me one moment. Right, you should now see the poll on your screen.
So the first option here is we have an excellent core activity map, systems diagram. Standard calls this a process interaction chart, but we prefer the core activity map because it kind of does more of what it says on the tin. And they are supported by lower level flowcharts that are understood by staff and used to assess risks at all levels. The second option is strategic risk is understood, and we have good process flowcharts, but they're not really used to assess risk. The third option is some risk and associated procedures are documented, but they're not readily available for use. And the third option is risk management processes are pretty much not documented or shared. We'll wait a few seconds for the results.
Okay, I'll end the voting now and share the results.
Aha. So we've got most people are in the second option. Strategic risk is understood, and we have good process flowcharts, but they're not used to assess risk. I think it might be useful if people in that section kind of download the developing systems booklet that we've got, as it kind of takes them through more of that process and it gives them more examples. But I think there are things that, as part of the presentation, we can kind of definitely help with. So the next stage, before we move on to the detail of 31,000, is to take a step back and look at the wider risk management universe. And here we're going to use a model from a free publication, a structured approach to risk and enterprise management. So I'm not going to read all of the information here, as it will be in the presentation that you download later. But even this moderately long list is probably not exhaustive. But it does make the useful distinction between internal and external risks and categorizing different types of risks. We have a similar list of risks, and that's also available in a document that you can download called a Director's Guide to Risk Management. So, in order to properly integrate risk management into the day-to-day operational management of the company, what we need to do is use this list or some similar list of risks, along with a bit of original thought, to check or cross-reference these risks to the core activity map. So it's a bit like pin the tail on the donkey, the game you played as kids at birthday parties as a kid, but only in this time you're not blindfolded. However, whilst it's often relatively easy to identify and deal with the risks in simple processes and systems, businesses are rarely simple. The part of the complexity arises as a result of the people and the things that they do, or indeed don't do. Using the systems diagram, all of these risks should be assigned to some part of the systems diagram model, bearing in mind that some of the risks may impact on different parts of the process at different times. So as an example, on a large construction project, there is often an upfront payment after the contractor has paid out for the long lead time items, and again at the end of the project once the contractor has left the site. In both examples, at these times, the company is considerably more exposed to the risk of not getting paid. In other instances, for instance, new product development, the activity may introduce risks to multiple parts of the process. This might include marketing, operations, and finance. And perhaps less obviously, depending on the significance of the product being launched, there could also be a strategic impact. Think way back to when Steve Jobs launched the iPad. could have gone horribly wrong. Instead, it created a completely new sector. Integrating risk into the day-to-day operational activities begins to ensure the risk management process adds value rather than becomes a backroom compliance function more concerned with ticking boxes. As a result of this, we can see that risk management is not a single subject at all. Risk management really sits meta to a plethora of organisational departments and plays a critical role in the effective functioning of any business. So, BS ISO 31000, to give it its full name, is part of a family of standards relating to risk management, codified by ISO, the International Organisation for Standards Organisation, and it breaks down into three components which we'll now be discussing: the principles, the framework, and the processes. But before that, let's have a look at the purpose of the model. The introduction of 31000 states organisations of all types and sizes face internal and external factors, as we've already seen, and influences that may make it uncertain as to whether they will achieve their objectives. 31000 is then about providing a framework that helps identify, manage, and mitigate those uncertainties. And to do so, the standard uses a series of diagrams to outline the framework for doing so. The top diagram outlines the principles, the left diagram the framework, and the right diagram the process. And given that time is limited, we're going to be concentrating on the principles and the nuts and bolts of the processes. The aim of 31000 is to outline the principles of risk management and to provide generic guidelines on risk management. In essence, it seeks to provide a universally recognised framework for companies to develop risk management processes. One of the real benefits is that 31000 has sought to bring together a previously confusing myriad of standards and methodologies that have typically differed between industry subject matters and regions. So exploring the principles first, many of which should either be familiar or at least come as no surprise to anyone involved in standards in any way. As if to emphasise the fact that the standard is about the positive impacts of risk management, value creation and protection is at the centre of the model. So let's now look at the components in turn. Given that the first principle is integration, this is where the core activity map and the systems diagram come in. A good one-page window into the entire system provides a simple view on a company's activities and brings to the fore how each of those activities, each of the teams and departments fits together. The one-page window effectively facilitates integration into all parts of the organisation activities. For me, this is where the critical understanding and logic and the sequence of the flow of the work through the organisation, how the work works, because once that's understood, risks from all of the processes that deliver value to the client and others can be established. As would hopefully be expected, the second principle asks the user to adopt a structured and comprehensive approach to risk management. And this is more likely to result in consistent and comparable results. Again, the one-page window, the systems diagram, ensures that a structured and comprehensive approach is adopted, as each of the parts of the model can be assessed in detail to ensure consistent and comparable results. The third principle is customization. The better the core activity map and the systems diagram reflect the way in which you think about how your work works, the more intimately it will inevitably be customized to your processes and practices, using your terms and terminology. Essentially, it's about squeezing you into the standard. It's absolutely not about squeezing the standard in your organisation into the standard. So the third principle is about flexibility, and it's absolutely critical that the framework and the processes are customised to your context, your environment, your objectives, and the actual activities undertaken to deliver value to the customer base. So we're back to understanding how the work works. And that may be significantly different for different organisations that may be doing the same things. As an example, we do a lot of work with lift companies, and we have two of a similar size and complexity. But one focuses on the installation of lifts for people like councils and housing associations, and they actually sell off the post-installation service contracts to other lift companies. Another works for a top-end blue-chip companies and is focused on the servicing activities, only getting involved in installing new lifts if they have to. Two companies in exactly the same industry, but in completely different markets with completely different risk management profiles, each of which have to be customized to their specific needs. The next principle is inclusive, and this is about setting up perhaps multidisciplinary teams that have the necessarily wide view of the activities undertaken by the company. The one-page window can then be used to manage the appropriate and timely involvement of staff, the people responsible for each part of the diagram and their associated activities. This enables their knowledge, their views and their perceptions to be systematically considered, which results in improved risk awareness and better informed risk management. The inclusive principle meshes nicely with the integrated principle, but this time is really focused not so much on departments and activities, but instead on people and involvement. It's about appropriate and timely involvement of stakeholders, which enables their knowledge, views and perceptions to be properly considered. As we all intuitively know, risk can emerge, change and disappear. Think about travelling to London on a train, getting to London Bridge Station, crossing the road, walking into the Shard and getting into a fast lift to travel to an appointment at one of the restaurants or simply going to the viewing desk. All of these activities involve a degree of risk, some more likely and for some, consequences potentially more severe than others. Risks can change for organisations too. Perhaps the external landscape changes, competitors fail or get taken over, supplier prices increase, the government or regulations change and the pound rises or falls. Risk management processes should anticipate, detect and acknowledge and respond to those changes in an appropriate and timely manner. Another cliche, but by its very nature, risk is unpredictable. Clearly, you can't have perfect information all of the time. So the standard asks you to take account of any limitations, uncertainties associated with the information you do have. One of the first risk management projects I was ever involved in, some years ago, pre-internet, was for a company making diamond tools. Now there was then, and I doubt now, no available data on the size of the market for diamond tools. We had to use a proxy. A very small percentage of the automotive market was used to estimate market size. It was by no means perfect, but it was the best available information. The seventh principle alludes to the fact that human behaviour and culture significantly influence aspects of risk, and these too should be accounted for. Now, I've only recently seen the movie Sully, which dramatises the time following a bird strike and the failure of both engines that Captain Sullenberger landed an Airbus A320 on the Hudson River, saving all on board. Apparently, post-incident, all of the initial simulations suggested he could have made it to one of the local airports and therefore saved not only all of the passengers, but also the plane. This was until they eventually allowed for some human factors, decision-making time being one of them. Once they'd factored in just a few seconds decision-making time, I think it was like 30 or 35 seconds, and then rerun all the simulations, it proved that there was no way he could have made it back to the suggested airport. Human behaviour can significantly influence a variety of aspects of the things that you have to do with risk management. Again, it should come as no surprise to anyone involved in standards that the final principle is continual improvement. However, as Henry Ford said about 100 years ago, the point of any standard is to make today's best practice tomorrow's norm. It's about the ongoing ratcheting up of performance over time. However, let's not forget that continual improvement is not nearly as important as innovation. Shown here as the jump 2/3 along the way the chart, which might actually be described as discontinual improvement. Now we have explored the principles in a little detail, let's move on to the processes. The processes for risk management are set out in the above diagram, and as might be expected, there is some crossover between some of the principles and the processes, communications being an example. Again, given the restrictions of time, we'll only be visiting a selection of these process aspects. Essentially, what the diagram is attempting to illustrate is that the harder aspects, risk management processes themselves, are bordered by the softer aspects of communication and consultation, monitoring and review, recording and reporting. Now let's look at the scope and context before going on to communication. The purpose of establishing the scope and context is to customize the risk management processes, enabling effective risk assessment and appropriate risk treatment. The construction and manufacturing sectors provide good examples of where these aspects play a critical role. Companies in both sectors have subcontractors and suppliers of products and services that are essentially inputs to the company's activities. In addressing the scope issue, what we should be trying to establish is where is the boundary around the risk management envelope is thrown. Would it or should it include these suppliers and subcontractors? The answer is probably back to the actual risks identified and the company's view on some of the principles. Communication seeks to promote awareness and understanding of risk, whereas consultation involves the obtaining and feedback of information to support decision making. Essentially, the consultation process is more involved and must always be a two-way process. However, communication and consultation should not be solely internally focused. So consultation and communication should extend to, where appropriate, external stakeholders, which might include key suppliers and subcontractors, especially if they hold particular knowledge about some of your processes. We have a number of architects and quantity surveyors who have occasional need for some very specialist consultancy services. If those services can't be provided at the time needed, there is often a real risk to project completion. And communication seeks to promote an understanding of risk, whereas consultation involves obtaining feedback and information to support decision making. Essentially, the consultation process is more involved and must always be two-way. However, communication and consultation should I'm sorry, there's a bit of duplication here, isn't it? I apologise. Sorry, moving on. Risk assessment. Risk assessment is the overall process of risk identification and risk analysis and risk evaluation. And risk assessment should be conducted systematically, iteratively, and collaboratively, drawing on the knowledge and views of other stakeholders. As an example, we've recently been working with a large nationwide entity based in the UK, where part of the work undertaken, it was discovered that the health and safety guys were using a 5x5 matrix to assess risk, the legal people were using a 4x4 matrix, and the head office corporate people were using a 3x3 matrix. Clearly, in this example, there was at the time no consistent nor integrated approach with regard to the risk assessment processes. As a bit of an aside, this one's taken I've previously located, and I'm not sure from where, so if you do know and can let me know, I'd like to properly credit it, this great little pictogram on probability and severity, here called impact. I think it's just a great diagram that separates the concept of likelihood and probability and severity and impact. Moving on to risk treatment. Risk treatment is the process of selecting and taking action to manage risk and includes avoiding, optimizing, transferring, retaining, and indeed accepting risk. And essentially, the risk treatment can lead to an iterative process of formulating and selecting risk treatment options, planning and implementing risk treatment itself, assessing the effectiveness of that treatment, deciding on whether the remaining risk is acceptable, and if not, taking further risk treatment. Again, similar to other standards, and more than that, any process that alludes to best practice, as would be expected, in order to account for ever-changing risk, there needs to be a monitoring and review process. Whilst the monitoring and review and recording and reporting activities are separate parts of the standard, they can and often are addressed together. Additionally, they need not be complicated at all. In many clients of ours, significant risks are detailed on a simple table, which is reviewed as part of a board or monthly meeting. This has 3 columns. The first detailing the risk, the second has a simple arrow signifying that month's risk status, which might be improved, reduced, or unchanged, and the third column details any actions that might need to be undertaken. Another client from a 6 million turnover manufacturing company that's part of a group have a monthly board meeting at which each of the senior team present a board report, each with their department risk, and at the board meeting, the impact to the company overall is discussed. As would be expected, the purpose of the monitoring and review is simply to assure and improve the quality and effectiveness of the risk management processes and its associated outcomes over time. So, returning to the initial question, why is this important? Did you know that the UK FTSE 100 was only set up in 1984? With 100 of the then biggest companies, as of last year, only 27 of those original 100 companies remained in the FTSE. Others have been taken over, merged, delisted, or collapsed. Think Carillion, Woolworths, and MFI. At the other end of the scale, small firms have a notoriously high failure rate. The vast majority don't make it to 5 years. In both instances, these are not sustainable businesses. If they were sustainable business, if they were not sustainable business, big or small, they cannot have been properly and robustly identifying risk nor exploiting the opportunities that would have made them viable in the long term. So the reason this stuff is important is I'm pretty sure you don't want to be placing the closed sign at your door saying something like, we really had no idea what we were doing. Inevitably, processes like this will take time, effort, money, and focus. So let's summarize today's session before moving on to next steps. Clearly, in a fast-moving, complex environment, aiming for the elimination of all risks would be like searching for the Holy Grail. It's not going to be found. However, acting effectively within an environment where we understand risk will help differentiate tomorrow's winning organisations from those that will be less successful. In summary, then, the aim of risk management is to make it both integrated and value creating. Compliance is a byproduct. We need to take risks as it drives human progress. The core activity map and the systems diagram creates a one-page window into any management system, and this should reflect the way in which your work works. We've discussed the principles and the processes described in 31,000, and the reason this is important is it's the backbone to providing an organisational longevity. But if you're inclined to take risk management road, what might be your next steps? A lot of these processes are in concept quite simple, but not necessarily easy to implement. If you're not sure on how to apply this to your own organisation, feel free to give me a call or contact me and we can chat through about how this might work for you. Depending on where you are geographically, we typically operate in the southeast of England, but have clients nationwide and abroad. Options might include a 1-hour strategy Skype or telephone call. This could be a one-to-one conference or a call with members of your team. A half-day evaluation visit. We could come to your offices, premises and review with you and your team any plans, processes, practice and policies and procedures you currently have in place. And these may be part of an existing ISO system or may need to be separate, from which we could develop a plan of action for taking you forward with assigned activities, timescales and responsibilities. Another option would be to undertake a mini project, typically undertaken when a company has done work on developing their risk management system already, but is perhaps not sure of the structure or how far they've actually got. As part of any mini project, we could work with you and your team to establish your core activity map and systems diagram, given that you didn't have something similar, and begin to flesh out the gaps in the system. But the first port of call is probably to download the presentation along with the supporting information we've made available. So this is the link to the webinar and the supporting information. So the full slide deck is there. There is a booklet called the Risk Management Universe Model, Developing Management Systems that Improve Sales and Bolster Margins. That's a little booklet and a Director's Guide to Risk Management, which is another guide that contains, among other things, a comprehensive list of typical risks. So, thank you. Please feel free to ask questions. Finally, the value of learning is not how much you did or did not enjoy it, but the value resides in the effectiveness of the actions you now take. As a reminder, the purpose of our organisation is to help you deliver better strategies, better systems, better measurements, key performance indicators, and engaged people delivering better results. Thank you for listening. I hope it's been helpful.
Thanks, Mark, for that informative webinar. It was really interesting. We just had a comment through from James who said we can't access the link. So to everyone who's dialed in, it's fine. I can send around the link on the follow-up email this afternoon that I'll send everyone. So you'll be able to either type the URL into your web browser now, or you can wait for me to send that round later on this afternoon. I
did check it this morning, so I'll check it again.
Okay.
Send you another link just to make sure.
Okay, great. And yes, so thank you for that. If anyone has got any other questions, then please feel free to write those in the chat function. We've got 5-10 minutes or so now that we can go through those with you. Whilst we wait for any comments to come through, I've got a question for you, Mark, and that is ISO 31000 certifiable like ISO 9001 or 14001, for example?
The answer to that is it is in the number. So it's registrations are usually organised around ISO 9001, ISO 14001, ISO 45001. This is 31,000, so it's not 31,001. If it were 31,001, it would be certifiable.
Okay.
You can't at the moment, and I suspect that will change over time, get a you can almost certainly get a certificate for it, but it wouldn't be a UCAS endorsed certificate.
Right.
So it's more kind of geared at best practice rather than registration at the moment.
Okay, brilliant. And where can participants get a copy of the standard from?
The easiest place to get a copy of the standard is from the BSI shop. So I can't remember how much I think it's probably about £120 based on other standards, which if you could buy it at WH Smith's, it would probably cost a £5 at best. Because you buy it, about 100. They're typically £100, £120 or so. But if you are a member of BSI, it's half the cost. You get a 50% discount. And
Okay.
all of the standards you download now come coded with whoever has downloaded it. It will put your details along the side, along a strip, to protect their copyright. So the electronic ones, they know exactly where they've come from, and if you give them to somebody else, you get into trouble.
Makes sense. Okay, right. We haven't had any questions come through. So what I'll do is when I send the follow-up email later on this afternoon, I'll include Mark's contact details in there. So if anyone's got any questions they'd like to ask Mark directly, then please feel free to do so, and Mark will get back to you at his earliest convenience. So thank you very much, Mark, for your time today, and thank you to everyone for joining.
Oh, thank you. Happy to be quizzed by whoever, and I shall check that link immediately.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.